loves, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a Christmas in July card using the Lawn Fawn How You Bean seashell add-on and Mermaid for You. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So actually for now, I am only using the How You Bean seashell add-on. We'll get to the Mermaid for You in just a little bit, but I am going to start with some very pale peach shades using YR000, YR00, and YR01. I'm starting with the conch shell, and I laid in that YR01 first to kind of separate each of the different sections of the shell, and then blend it out with the YR00, and then soften that with the YR000, and left a little bit of white space in the center of each section for an extra highlight. I'm going to move on to my Nautilus shell and repeat the same process, keeping that darkest shade, the YR01, on the inside of the swirl, which will then become the outer edge of that shell. And again, I'm just blending that out. I'm going to add some extra color to that in just a little bit, but I wanted about half of it to be in this peachy tone. And then I'll also do the clamshell down at the bottom. I'm keeping those darkest shades closest to that hinge and then blending up lighter as I go up the shell. And I kept all of my shading for that one on the right hand side. I think either side would be fine. I just, because I'm left-handed, the right hand side is more of a go-to for me. It's just a little bit more comfortable to shade on. Then I'm going to go back to each of these shells and add some little dot detail with that YR01 to just add a little extra texture and, you know, just to make them look a little bit more interesting. And I will come back to these shades in a little while, but for now I'm going to switch over to some blues. I wanted all of my shells to be kind of in these blue and peach tones. So I was going for a very, very simple color palette for today, and I wanted to do something that was unexpected since this is a Christmas in July card. I didn't want to do like a traditional Christmas red and green. I wanted to go completely out of the box and do really beachy shades, but in a Christmas card. So for the starfish, I'm using B00, B41, and B45. And that B45 is a little bit dry. I did just refill that marker, but I think maybe that nib is just a little bit clogged, so I may need to change the nib on that one. So it didn't blend as well as I would have liked. But once I add in the dot detail later on after I've given it a chance to dry, it'll help hide any unevenness. So I'm moving on to this next shell, and I'm starting with the B41 for the darkest and blending out with that B00. And then for every other stripe on that shell, I will add in the B45 and then blend that out with the B41 and use the B00 in the center. So it'll just be tone on tone with those darker stripes on the lighter blue background. But I was not entirely happy with the blend between the B41 and the B00, and I didn't want to bleed outside the line, so I couldn't really work over it as much as I normally would like I did with the starfish. So I decided to bring in an extra shade. I'm going to use the B000 to blend with that B41 as the lightest, and I did like how that turned out a bit better. I'll also take a little of that B000 and B00 and add it to the inner part of the conch shell, and I'm going to put that on the inner part of the Nautilus shell as well, just softening that into the peachy tones that are already there. Then I'll take the B00 and add just a touch of that to the top edge of the clamshell, blending down into the peach. And then for this other spiral shell, I'm going to start with the B41 on each little section there, right up against the line, and then blend that out with the B000 and then the B000. Then I am going to do this last shell a little bit different. I'm actually going to start with the B000 and then blend out with the B000. And then before I do the stripes, I'm going to do the dot detail on these little shells and starfish while I have these blue shades out. So I'm using that B45 to add some dots to the starfish and the darkest stripes on the shell next to it. I also added a few dots to the starfish with the B41, and I used those in the lighter stripes on the shell next to it. I'll add that to the other spiral shell, just adding a few little dots there. They're pretty hard to see on camera, but they're a little bit more visible in person. And then for this other shell that's unfinished, I switched to the B000, and that really didn't show up well at all, so I switched back to the B41 for the nautilus shell, and I went over the dots on the spiral shell one more time. And then for the rest of the stripes on that unfinished shell, I decided to go back to those peachy tones. So I added in a little of the YR01 on the outside edges, blended out with the YR00, and then filled in the center with the YR000. I'll add some dot detail to those stripes with the YR01, and I did also color the inner part of the spiral shell, which I forgot to show on camera. And then I'm going to add in just a tiny bit of yellow. I wanted just the barest bit. So I'm using Y000 and Y000 and adding a little bit to that starfish, just blending that into the blue. I'm also going to add a little bit to the nautilus shell, just kind of bridging the gap between the peach and the blue there. Just very softly. And I also added just the tiniest bit to the clam shell. So just a few quick strokes with that Y000 and then blending that out with the Y000. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. I'm also going to stamp out the two corals from Mermaid for You, and I'm going to do them first in some Peachy Keen ink, and then I will clean off those stamps, reposition them on that leftover piece of cardstock from my coloring of my shells, and then I'm going to stamp them down using some Moonstone ink. And the Moonstone ink stamped just a little bit blotchy the first time, especially on that second coral. So I am going to stamp that down twice to just make sure I have a better impression. And then I'll set those aside to dry. For my background, I'm going to start with a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock that I have trimmed out with the large stitch rectangle stackables, and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxides, starting with some Salvage Patina in the center, just trying to do almost like an oval shape in the center of that panel. And then I'm going to bring in some Stormy Sky, and I will bring that in from the outer edges toward the center where that Salvage Patina is. And right now I'm not trying to blend things, I'm just trying to block in the different portions of the color. So I'll bring that right up, overlapping the Salvage Patina a little bit, and then blend back out with the Salvage Patina. Then I'll move on to my darkest shade, which is going to be Chipped Sapphire. And I want to really darken up those outer edges with this and make them distinct. That's also going to help really draw your eye to the stitching detail on the outer edges. So I'm just really deepening that up, adding some nice heavy layers of ink there. And then I'll go back down to the Stormy Sky and then back to the Chipped Sapphire, just working back and forth until I have a look that I'm happy with. And I didn't want to go over that Salvage Patina center too many times, so I kind of saved it for, the end. but I did want to make sure that the blend was looking kind of smooth and seamless. This is an underwater scene, so I didn't want it to be too patchy. So again, I just worked my way back around until I had a depth on those outer edges that I liked, and then blended toward the center one last time using all three of those shades. To add some metallic splatters, but it can be hard to emboss over, so I am just tearing off a sheet of my to-do list from yesterday and blocking off an area where I can stamp my sentiment, and then I just turn that panel upside down so that I could splatter the top two edges first. And I'm mixing up this paler gold shade from my Gansai Tambi Starry Colors, and once that is mixed up how I want it, I will just tap that on the edges with a thin paintbrush, and I'm just tapping that against my finger so that I can get super fine little droplets coming in from all four corners toward the center. And then I'm going to mix up a darker gold shade and do the same process. I kind of wanted to have like the two tones of gold on the background. So that one is a bit more actual golden tone. The other one is more of like a maybe not platinum, but it's a paler gold. So maybe like a white gold, and then we've got more of a yellow gold. So I will remove that section where I have blocked off for my sentiment, and then just add a few extra droplets because I didn't want it to look like it had been masked off, even though that's exactly what I did. I just wanted it to be a bit more organic. So I'm going to set this panel aside to dry, and then once it has, I will pop it in my MISTI, and I'm going to treat the bottom with a Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool to prevent any static cling, and stamp a sentiment using some Versamark ink. And I'm actually using a sentiment from Christmas Fishes, which I will show in just a minute. Stamping that down twice and just putting very little pressure on that stamp so that I don't squish the sentiment and make it like extra wide, you know, just very gently. And then I'll coat that with some gold embossing powder. Now here is where I realized that my background panel was not completely dry. It was almost dry. It felt dry, but it wasn't quite there. So it did get a little bit of extra powder sticking, and so I just used a dry paintbrush to clean that up. And then I brought my heat gun to that after heating it off to the side for maybe 30 seconds, and then just embossed that sentiment until it was nice and bright and shiny. While I have my MISTI out, I'm also going to stamp on the inside of my card, and there is that Christmas Fishes stamp set. I'm using Lawn Fawn Apricot cardstock and going back to that Peachy Keen ink, and I stamped two little fish, and we fish you a Merry Christmas and a little trio of bubbles. So now I'm ready to start assembling. I'm going to take that focal panel and glue that to the front of my card, just making sure that's lined up nice and straight by squeezing those corners and then pressing that down into place. And then I will bring in my images, and I have added foam tape to the backs of all of the shells. So I'm going to arrange these so that they are kind of in a Christmas tree formation. And I'm starting with the clamshell. That is going to be the trunk of the tree. And then I'm just going to start adding shells on either side of it, trying to make it kind of balanced and in a bit of a triangular shape, just loosely based on a Christmas tree. But I'm trying not to press those shells down very hard at all just yet, because I know that this is going to take a little bit of fiddling to get it just right. So I'm just very loosely placing them down and then readjusting as needed to make sure that there is enough space between them to try to keep it fairly even. So next I'm going to add the conch shell kind of on its side pointing toward the top, and then I'll add my other striped shell on the right hand side, and then at the very top of the tree is where I'm going to place that starfish. So I just kind of keep readjusting and, you know, making sure that I have the spacing right, but that it's also kind of obvious that it looks like a Christmas tree, if that makes any sense. So once I had everything on, I felt like it was a bit too low. So I am going to pull up the shells and kind of readjust and move them a little bit higher on that scene. And then I will take the corals and kind of space those in between the shells and figure out the placement for there. So I originally had stamped out one blue and one peach of each of those two corals, but I realized that I was going to need one more of each. So I ended up stamping out an extra one. And the coral does kind of make me lose a little bit of the shape of the Christmas tree, but it almost reminds me of a snowflake, as if the Christmas tree is the shells and then it's standing in front of a snowflake made up by the coral. I don't know, but it made sense in my head, so hopefully it still kept the shape of the Christmas tree and, you know, didn't become less obvious that it's a Christmas card. So I'm just adding those corals flat to the card with my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue so I can get behind all of those little pieces and make sure that it is adhered firmly. And then we'll move on to some embellishments. So I pulled out several different embellishments. I wasn't sure what I wanted to use just yet. So I have some iridescent crystals from Studio Katia and some snow crystals from Studio Katia. Both of these come in a mix of sizes. And I'm just going to start placing them down on the card. A Christmas tree obviously needs to have little baubles and things on there. So that is what these are going to be. So I'm just adding a drop of glue and then picking up a gem with my Studio Katia embellishment wand. And I have those gems in my Twiddler's Nook embellishment tray, which I really love. That's helpful for so many things. But I am going to just keep adding until I fill up all of the space kind of between and around the seashells and make it look nice and full and festive. So I did add quite a bit on there, and once I was done adding it kind of between the shells, I even decided to add a few on top of the shells. Normally I wouldn't do this because it does raise the profile of your card and make it more tricky to go through the mail. So this might end up being a card that I hand deliver to a family or friend that lives nearby, or you could always pop it in a padded mailer. But I didn't stop there with the embellishment. This is going to be one blinged out card because I also decided to add a little stardust stickles to each of my shells. So I am going to just go around and add that. I didn't cover them by any means, but just added like a little flash of that stickles to each of them so that they have a little bit of extra sparkle. If there's any time that I think it's appropriate to go crazy with the bling, I think it is Christmas time. So yeah. And I will pick that up to the camera in just a minute so you can see just how much bling I'm talking about between all of those gems and the gold splatter and the stickles. And then there's another peek at the inside. I'm really curious to know how many of you guys make Christmas cards all throughout the year and how many save it for just the fall and winter. So definitely leave me a comment down below and let me know what you do. I'd love to hear it. I do hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products that I used will be listed and linked for you down below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.